this little farmhouse, and they look inside the window, and inside is warm, and there's the family sitting around the table and all laughing and enjoying a meal and just being comfortable and just having a very typical regular afternoon dinner or evening dinner. And one of the band members looks at the other and says, "How do people live like that?"
Hey guys, I'm Paul Cox, and I just had the privilege of interviewing an illustrator friend of mine, Cedric Hohnstadt. He is the artist behind Narrow Road Comics, which is on narrowroadcomics.com. It is a Christian webcomic that touches on various social issues from a Christian worldview. We discussed online criticism. We also discussed being a Christian illustrator in a secular market, as well as a few other things. So I'm excited to introduce Cedric and his work to you. My introduction to you was because of my love of cereal. You can probably imagine what that might be. I grew up on cereal and Saturday morning cartoons. That was my weekend jam. And yeah, one of the highlights of my mornings was reading the back of the cereal box. And all through my childhood and into my marriage, I would look at the back of the cereal box. And one of those boxes really jumped out at me and really made an impression on me. And it was one of the Monster cereals. And I remember looking at that thinking, oh man, I wish I could talk to that illustrator who did that and see how they landed that job and just tell them how much I really enjoyed their artwork. And lo and behold, who was that illustrator?
Probably me.
It was you.
I mean, what year it was, but yeah, I only did it 1 year, but I assume that's the year you're talking about. Way back there behind me on the shelf is some Monster cereal boxes. They're way in the background, but yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. I live in Minneapolis, and I've been illustrating for close to 30 years now. And there's an agency here in the Twin Cities that I don't know if they still have the contract, but at the time they were working with General Mills on a relaunch of their. They have Frankenberry and Blueberry and Count Chocula, but they have two other characters, Yummy Mummy and Fruit Brute, that had kind of been tucked away in a closet for several years, and they wanted to rebrand them and relaunch them. And so they hired this agency in Minneapolis that did some. I can't take full credit for it because they did a lot of the preliminary stuff and rough sketches, and then they hired me to do the final illustration for the back of the art on the back of the box, and I got to do the front artwork for Yummy Mummy and Fruit Brute. I kind of worked back and forth with them. They did. I'd do some things and they'd tweak it and I'd tweak it, and we kind of went back and forth. But yeah, it was a really, really fun project. It was super cool because I like those characters. I grew up with them too. They're pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I'm glad to be talking with you now. But that's not all you do. Can you give us kind of an introduction as to who you are and what you do?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So my name is Cedric Hohnstadt. My website is cedricstudio.com. It's CEDRIC, studio.com. And I'm a professional illustrator and cartoonist. I have been for coming up on close to 30 years. I just had a long career. I've dabbled in a little bit of everything. I've done children's books. I've worked with animation studios. I've worked on toy concept art for Hasbro and Disney, and I've done cereal boxes and packaging artwork. And lately, I have a Christian webcomic called Narrow Road Comics that I've been tinkering around with as well. So and I do courtroom sketching now and then when there's a big trial in the Minneapolis area. So I kind of do a little bit of everything, but whatever I can do to stay busy, as long as people will keep paying me money to draw, I'm going to keep doing it.
What led you into illustration as a career? I mean, have you always enjoyed illustration, or?
Yeah, ever since I was a little kid, I could draw. I grew up in a small town where I was the one kid who was really good at drawing. And when I was in high school, I had a good art teacher, and there was a guy who named Ralph Brown, who was freelance illustrator designer, I think from New York, but somewhere out on the East Coast, and he moved to the next town over from where I was growing up and kind of set up his studio there. And my art teacher found out about it and set up an interview, or set up a chance for me to come and visit his studio because he knew I was interested in drawing. And it was so cool. It's the first time I saw somebody who had a studio in their house, and I was like, you get paid to do this? People will just pay you to sit at home and draw things and make things? And I knew right away then, I was like, that's what I want to do. I know not everybody is fortunate enough to know what they want to do in life, but that lit a fire under me. I'm like, that's what I want. So I went to art school for 6 years, and while I was finishing up art school, I started doing freelancing, and I worked part-time jobs for about 2.5 years trying to build my freelance clients to where I could just quit the part-time stuff. At one point I was driving school bus, and I was working at an art supply store during the day, and I was freelancing at night, just trying to build my career. But that's what I wanted to do, and by the grace of God, I've been able to keep doing that. God's been very good to me.
Awesome, man. That's so cool that you were able to actually interact with an illustrator at a young age, and be just kind of almost mentored a little bit by that, and not everybody has that chance, and that's really cool. Curious how you came to faith, and then what made you decide to start the Narrow Road Comics?
So I always was kind of religious as a kid. Like I would go to church, and I just was really moved by things I was hearing and learning. Like around 6th grade, I started bringing my Bible to school, and at recess, instead of in the wintertime in Minnesota, it's cold, so I do recess indoors at the gym, and instead of playing basketball, which I was never into sports, I would actually sit there and read my Bible at recess. I was kind of a Bible nerd. But it wasn't until I got to college, I was, you grow up and you get out on your own, and I started to try and decide, what do I really believe? What am I believing just because my parents said it was true, and what do I really think and believe? And I really went through a period of doubting and questioning. And I was working nights at a grocery store in college, and I remember walking home from the store to the dorms, and I was walking down this street, and I was walking the sidewalk, and there were giant tall trees that were coming up on either side with just a little thin strip of sky between the trees. And I remember walking and really questioning, and I remember just saying like a little prayer, saying, God, you're supposed to be real and all powerful and everything. I'll bet if you're real, I'll bet you could make a bird fly over my head right now in that little strip of sky. I bet would you do that just to show me that you're real? And I waited a second, and nothing happened. And I was like, well, figures. And I took a step, and then I heard, and I looked up, and out of this tree right above me, about a dozen birds just like came out and just went flying right over my head. And I was like, whoa, that was cool. That really struck me. And then a few days later, some kids from a campus Christian organization knocked on my dorm, and they put on a presentation answering people's skeptics' questions about Christianity and the Bible. And I learned that you can, that this isn't just some fairy tale. That there's a lot of smart, reasonable reasons why people can trust the Bible and believe it. And then they went through the gospel with me and helped me understand that it's not just enough to believe about Jesus, but I had to really surrender my life to him, and I made a decision to do that. And it's ever since then, I've been just trying to learn and grow and make lots of mistakes, and still struggle with sin and everything else, but trying to live a life that's for my Savior instead of for myself.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, and then I suppose you asked about comics, though.
Well,
right?
Yeah. Well, also, how does your faith affect how you interact with your illustration clients and how you approach your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I still am trying to figure that out, even after all these years. I don't make a big thing about it. I work with Christian clients and Christian projects, but I mean, if anybody hires me, I'm as a professional illustrator. That's where I think my calling is. My goal is to try and do what's best for the client and be helpful to them, and try to be kind and professional and give them good quality work. I do occasionally get requests for projects that I can't do because of my what Christianity teaches about certain issues. So that's been it's come up a couple times. I try to, if I have to decline a project, I try to say something like, I want to help you, but because of what my faith, my religion teaches me, would be incompatible, and so you'd probably want to have somebody on board who's really going to be excited about your project and really put their whole heart into it. And unfortunately, I can't do that. I want to, but I just can't. And so respectfully decline and try and frame it that way so that it's showing that I'm still trying to put their needs first. But I also do Christian projects. I've been able to work on a lot of fun things, and I did a web comic. I've always wanted to be a cartoonist and really enjoyed reading I'm old enough to remember reading the newspaper comics every day, and I read a lot of comic books growing up and Mad Magazine, and I always thought that would just be the coolest job ever. And a few years ago, I started doing a web comic called Sketchbook Silliness, which was just me goofing around in my sketchbook and trying to write jokes and be silly. And it started out as really lame dad jokes, but some of them got to be, a few of them got popular and were shared around. And did that for about 3 years. And every once in a while, I would do something more serious about my Christian faith. And some of those comics were the most popular and the most widely shared. And after 3 years of doing that, I just wasn't making any money at it, even though I was getting a lot of followers, and a couple of my comics went viral. It's just really hard to make a living at that, so I had to quit doing it, and then just did freelancing again for a few years. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to try and just do some Christian web comics. It's just something I feel like I want to do. I was actually inspired a lot by the work you were doing. Guys like Adam Ford and you are two guys I was watching a lot who just were doing all this Christian stuff and using their talents to put messages out there. I feel really strongly that in our culture right now, especially, we need more Christians to, in a loving and thoughtful way, to try and present the truth of the gospel and of God and the Bible to our culture, which is just going all different directions, and try and we can't just kind of coast along, and we just can't just keep coasting on the luxury of the cult, where I grew up with, where you just kind of assume everybody's kind of going along and everything's fine. It's not fine anymore. And so I'm trying to be more bold and outspoken somewhat with my comics and stuff, but I haven't really brought that over too much into my freelance work for my clients. I kind of see that as like a separate thing,
right,
in my mind. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, that makes total sense. When you decline those jobs based on your convictions, do you ever get any pushback from that?
No, usually if that's the way it comes out, a client approaches me and I just have to politely decline it like that. No, that's all worked out fine. Everybody's always been great about it. The only pushback I've ever gotten was on social media, like on my personal views about things. A while back, I made the decision to have like a separate account for my illustration studio and then my personal Facebook or whatever. My personal Facebook and on my illustration studio, I just try to keep things pretty much about artwork stuff most of the time, and on Twitter and whatever. But on my personal side, I'm trying to I would be more vocal. And there was in Minnesota a few years ago when there was a vote to change our constitution, I think, to make gay marriage a legal thing, and I didn't think that was right and was vocal about it. And I had a client who I had been doing some work for cussed me out on Facebook and said, "I'm never working with you again," and blah blah blah. That's probably the worst it's ever gotten, but I haven't had to pay too high a price for anything yet. Most people are easygoing and kind. Even if they don't agree with me, they've been very respectful. So
That's
I've been
good.
fortunate that way, I think.
Let's talk more about Narrow Road Comics and what kind of feedback from your audience do you get? Do you get any pushback there because some of them are pretty bold
Okay,
comics.
well, it's so far it hasn't been too bad. the sketchbook silliness I did had gotten a pretty good sized following. At one point, I had like 60,000 followers on TikTok, and it was one of my comics got voted to the front page of Reddit. I haven't reached anything like that yet with Narrow Road Comics. So I think most people still don't know that it's even out there. I'm been trying to pray and read through a lot about how bold to be and what that looks like, because my natural tendency has always been to be a people pleaser. I did not want to rock the boat. I just want to be. I was raised to just Christians we just got to be nice and friendly all the time and just be nice guys, and that's what a good Christian is. And I've been listening to. I don't know if anybody knows who Doug Wilson is. Read a book that he wrote about satire as Christians, and
is that the Serrated Edge?
Yeah, it's called I think that's what it's called, the Serrated Edge. Yeah, and it's like a defense of Christian satire. And I'm trying to. I've also been doing a lot of study. I have in my notes app. I have this gigantic note of all these mostly Bible verses on conflict, and there's because the Bible is such a. I mean, it's a thick book, so it says a lot about a lot of things. But there's a ton of stuff in the Bible about conflict, and some of it is hard to sort out. Like on the one hand, it says it does say we should be gentle, absolutely, but it also says we should be bold. It says we should be peacemakers. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers," but it also says we are to be soldiers of Christ. It says to be loving everyone, but to hate what is evil. How do we sort all that out, and how do we balance it, and when do you be bold, and when do you be gentle and kind? And there's a verse I think in Timothy where Paul says like pursue gentleness and pursue love, and then the very next verse he says fight the good fight. And how do you pursue gentleness and love while you're fighting? I mean, what does that look like? So I'm going through my own kind of personal calibration, trying to figure out how that all works. But I feel like maybe I've just been so quiet and nice and gone along so long my whole life. If I really want to have faith and trust God to do what's right, I think there's a lot of Christian history and the Bible is full of stories of people taking risks and putting it on the line to serve God and do what's right. And so I think right now where I'm at, I'm trying to find that balance. Like I don't want to be cowardly, because like another verse that really spoke to me was in Revelation when it talks about the lake of fire and the damned people that will be thrown at the lake of fire. It lists a whole bunch of the people who the liars and the cheats and the adulterers and blah blah. But the first thing on the list is the cowardly are the ones that will be thrown in the lake of fire. And that really jumped out to me, because you don't really think of cowardice as that big of a deal,
right?
But apparently it is. And then there's a verse where Jesus says, "Be I can't remember. So something like, woe to you when all people speak well of you, for so they spoke of the false prophets." And so I had to really wrestle with this idea. Like if you're supposed to be a nice Christian, you're supposed to try and get along with everybody. You don't want to ever make anybody mad, because then you're sinning somehow. But Jesus is actually kind of saying, I think, the opposite. He's saying, woe to you when everybody likes you. And that there's always going to, there's that whole tension of Christianity where we're living in a fallen, sinful world, and there's going to be people who resist, and there's going to be people who are against Christianity and against Jesus. And so, I don't know what that looks like yet. I'm still trying to figure it out. But I do feel like we're going through tumultuous, I feel like right now, it feels like, maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like we're in the middle of some massive shifts that are happening in the culture and the society right now, that we're living through revolutionary times, that the world 50 years from now is not going to be anything at all like it was 50 years before. And I think people are going to look back on this time, maybe how we look back on, I don't know, World War II or something like that, where it was just a massive shift. I mean, on the other, I know it's not that bad. World War II was horrible. I don't think we're at that level yet, but I just want to try and figure out. So I'm praying a lot and trying to ask for God's guides. But I've also been at my career long enough that if I do just completely self-destruct my career, I guess I'd rather, try and be courageous about it and face the consequence than play it safe and then always look back with a little bit of shame about, well, why didn't I speak up or why didn't I say something more? I don't know.
Right.
That's where I'm at
Yeah.
right now, but I have a lot to learn. I'm not an expert on it at any stretch. So I feel like I'm rambling on and on, but go
Oh
ahead.
no,
You can
you're
talk.
good. I mean, I think you're right about the kind of trying to find the balance between
Hmm.
satire and being a nice Christian. Um, I feel like I've had to struggle with like toning myself down because I
Mm,
sometimes can be a little harsh. Um,
okay. Yeah.
I just have that. That's just my
I'm not
personality.
agreeing in your hearts. I don't see you that way, but I know what you mean. I have those thoughts too sometimes.
Right, right. I mean, I'm kind of a blunt person sometimes, and
Hmm.
so that comes off as harsh.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so with my tunes, I've sometimes had to tone it back a little bit, or I've had to apologize more often than I've wanted to for different things I've made and posted. Um, I think there's a time for satire and there's a time for being nice, and I think the way our society is right now, I think it's almost calling for that harshness to kind of. It's almost like a quick slap in the face to kind of bring you back to reality, so
Mm.
to speak. And I think there's a there is a balance that could be had, but I think sometimes it calls for more harshness than others. I mean, we have examples of Jesus even saying, calling people whitewashed tombs, um,
Mm-hmm.
and then the who was it with the prophets of Baal? He was making fun of their God, saying, "Oh, he's probably in the restroom,"
Right.
things like that. And I don't know. I think as Christians, it's kind of a responsibility to speak truth to to situations, and sometimes that truth can be harsh.
Yeah, and that's something that a distinction I found helpful was I heard a pastor named, I don't know if you know who Chuck Swindoll is. I used to listen to him a lot
Hmm.
when I was younger. Big radio pastor, but he said that something he said that stuck with me is I don't care if the truth offends, but I care very much if I offend. And I'm trying to find that balance of if the truth is like upsets somebody, I can't help that, but I want to try and present it in such a way that it still comes across as loving. Like I want to be like with satire, it's very easy I think to slip into just mocking and ridicule and to the point of just being insulting or mean spirited,
Hmm.
and I don't think that's right either. It's a real hard. So I don't have it figured out. That's such a hard line to walk. But yeah, there's a lot of silly ideas out there that are just being promoted as good, and they're destructive and horrible, and we have to expose them as or stand up against it if we can.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's. I totally agree. We need to be more outspoken.
Right, and use that satire to almost help people
Mhm.
see the truth more clearly. So I think in that sense, rather than just making fun of something with no end goal, but having your end goal be helping to people see the truth more clearly, I think that can be
Right.
accomplished very well through certain types of satire.
Yeah, there should be a joyfulness about it, like that like look that's just silly. Look, this is so much better. There should be like a positive should be like a positive ridicule rather than
Hmm.
like a harsh negative ridicule. I don't know if that makes sense, but we should be kind of
Yeah.
joyful in our isn't this nuts? This is silly. Um, I think that's probably the right balance, but
So I've seen a lot. I feel like I've seen a lot more new comics on your Narrow Road Comics website or on your social media. Have you been kind of switching gears to be more consistent on
it
that,
kind of
or do you have a plan?
well it kind of comes in waves. I my process is that well, first of all, we just came off of Pride Month, and so
Hmm.
I this year I don't know if it was the right decision or not, but I kind of have felt I had a few ideas for some comics around the whole LGBTQ issues that uh, and I have a few I haven't finished yet. But when I write my comics or think, first of all, I think the writing is more important than the drawing. I like to try to do good drawings, but I think writing it well is the most important part, because I want to try to choose my words really carefully and try to keep it really short and brief and punchy if I can. And I will often have an idea, and then I'll start roughing it out and and then I'll just sit on it for sometimes days or weeks before I take it further and try to almost forget about it and then look at it fresh and see how it strikes me. Because when you first think of something, at least for me, I can be so like, yeah, I'm so passionate, feeling so worked up about this issue right now that I'm not in the right mental place that my readers are going to be in, because they're going to be seeing it maybe, just coming off of their lunch break or something and then flipping through their phone, and maybe they were thinking about the weather or their kids or something, and I want to see how they may not even listen to politics or anything, and so I want to be real careful about tone. And we live in such a day where people are so quick to just interpret everything in the worst possible light. Like if you say something that could be interpreted two different ways, they're always going to jump on the worst version of it. Anyway, so it kind of comes in waves. Sometimes I'll get a bunch of ideas in a few days, and then I might go a couple of weeks or more without any ideas at all. And I don't make any money at it. I've had a little trickle of income from the Narrow Road Comics, and I've got a few supporters, and I'm very, very grateful for that. But so far, it's not a good source of income. So I have to do it in my free time, and I have to prioritize my freelance work. And so yeah, it kind of comes in waves. Sometimes I'll have a few comics, almost maybe twice a week, and then I might go 2 months before I do another one. I'd rather do a comic I'd rather do them fewer and far between, but feel really good about them, or feel like I did a good job. That's the best I could do, and it's an important thing. It's something I really want to say, than to just crank something out because it's like, oh my gosh, it's Tuesday, I got to crank something, and put up a sloppy comic or a comic that would be misinterpreted or misunderstood or isn't in the best spirit or something. So I want to try and do quality over quantity.
Have you received any encouragement from believers? I know we talked about some of the negative things, but have you received encouragement from people, other believers or non-believers, for your comics?
I'd say most of the feedback I get is positive. I get I do get some pushback, and I've had a couple, had a relative who got really upset at something, a comic I did once, and kind of cut me off. And but most of the feedback's been positive. I get encouraging notes from people sometimes that just say, I just wanted to tell you, I think, thanks for saying this, or I really like your work. I've had a few people, like I said, subscribe to me on Substack, which I don't know. Substack is like a place where people can, it's mostly for writers, but people can just, write a weekly article, or let me get like a newsletter, and people can subscribe to it like you would to a newspaper. And so I put my comics up there, and I say if you subscribe, I don't have any bonus goodies to give you because I just don't have the bandwidth for that. So it's really just a gift that you're giving me. But I've still had a few people subscribe anyway. So that's always, if people are willing to part with their money to support what you're doing, I think that's a sign that you're doing something right.
Who are some of your biggest artistic influences?
That's a good question. There's a ton of them. I grew up way back in the 80s, reading Mad Magazine, which had, I think to this day, still has some of the best cartoonists America's ever produced. The content isn't always great, but the drawings are amazing. And guys like Jack Davis and Paul Coker. I read The Far Side and Calvin and Hobbes and Bloom County a lot. I always liked the writing in Bloom County better than the drawing. I don't know if you know what that is, but that's a popular newspaper comic strip, sort of political back in the day. Right now, today, for people who are working today, one guy that I really admire is a guy named Jim Benton, Benton. He's not a Christian; he's an atheist, I think, and mocks religion and has a very cynical outlook on the world. So I don't agree with a lot of his comics, but man, is he just amazing at doing fun little drawings that are simple and expressive, and his writing is really strong, and I'm really impressed by his stuff. When I read his comics, and I'm like, that's what I want to do, except a Christian version of that or whatever. But I like him a lot. And there's other like Sarah's Scribbles I read as a webcomic that she does some fun stuff. And um, uh, yeah, Norman Rockwell I liked growing up a lot. I think his work was popular not just because it's Americana, but because it's really simple, and going back to like simple compositions, real like a real sharp, a focused idea, and it's about most of the paintings he did were about something and tell a story. You can if you just stop and look at it for a few seconds, you can see there's a lot of character and personality and story in these little paintings that he did that I think is cool. That inspires me.
Do you have a job that you found that was like the most interesting job or your favorite job?
So I could answer that two ways. There's from the content set, like not maybe like the best artwork I ever did, but I did. There's an evangelist out in California named Ray Comfort. Excuse me. He has a ministry called Living Waters, and he does a really good job of trying to reach people with the gospel, but doing it in a way he's clever and he's funny and he's kind and he's loving and he's thoughtful, and he makes these gospel tracks that are not like the chick tracks that were popular years ago that are, kind of offensive and obnoxious, pushy. He's uses a lot of humor and is very thoughtful. And I got to illustrate a gospel tract for them that has been, I think it's been translated into 40 language or 50 languages now, and it's been several, like 10 million copies have been printed and distributed around the world. So that's amazing that I got to do that. And if I inside I feel better about having the privilege to do that than anything else I've ever done. But in terms of just pure enjoyment of doing drawing, those things like those cereal boxes were pretty fun. I've done some work on Veggie Tales back in the day. I got to do some costume design and props for them. I've been given the chance to do some really cool projects that young me would have given an arm and a leg to do, and so I've been very blessed. God's blessed me much better than my sins deserve. He's really given me some fun stuff to work on.
I've seen those gospel tracts out in the wild. That's the other artwork of yours that I've seen in the wild. Is those?
Yeah. Oh, can I say something about those quick?
Yeah.
Part of the deal I did with them was that I said, don't pay me for it, but I'd like to keep them copyright free so that other ministries and stuff can use them and print them and distribute them. So I have, and they agreed to that. So even though it's written by Ray Comfort, basically it's his idea. It was my artwork, and he's allowed me to do that. And so I have a website called freecartoontract.com, and where you can download it for free. And if you want to pay to have them printed and distributed, you can. And also, if you want to translate it into another language, I have a system on that website where you can get it. If you get it translated, I will, in my free time. It takes me a few months to do it, but I'll redo the whole layout and everything so that the word balloons all work in the new language. And sometimes that means redoing some of the artwork or making it all fit, because a sentence that's 3 words long in English might be 5 words long in Belgium or something, and so have to redo it to make it fit. But I'll do that, and you can have it printed in that language. And I've been doing that over the years, and we've got about I think it's about 50 languages now that we're up to. So so people can get it there, and you can also, every language, there's a shareable version where the whole gospel cartoon is just printed on one web page in every language, and you can just share that page with your friends or whatever, and they can just read the whole thing right there. So just want to promote that, freecartoontract.com, if anyone's interested.
That's really cool. I'll put that link in the comments or in the show notes. And the idea that you have it on a web page that they can just share as well. That's super handy. Any kids or anyone who is interested in getting into illustration as a career, what would you recommend they start out with as far as finding work? Would you recommend they find an agent, or go through some sort of website where they can find jobs? What would you recommend?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I'm not sure how to answer that, because it was so long ago when I started out that when I started, the internet had just been invented. It was just it hadn't really changed society yet. I was still, it was just, everything was so different back then. I think a couple thoughts I have is that I don't know if I would necessarily recommend anyone go to art school if you don't have to, because it's so expensive. But here's the caveat I would say. If you are the type of person if you're a self-starter and you motivate yourself and set goals for yourself and just, teach yourself basically, and you're happy to do that, then I don't think you need art school anymore. I think you could learn almost everything you need to know online with either free videos on YouTube or some really low-cost options like there's a website called svslearn.com. I think it's the School of Visual Storytelling. They've got some great curriculum. There's Steven Silver has a schoolism.com, I think it's called. There's some really good resources that are out there. But if you're the kind of person who needs to be kind of have your hand held a little bit and have someone give you assignments and someone tell you what to do, and you need that extra motivation, then yeah, I would try art school. But I also think you have to really be driven to succeed, because it is rough. I've been doing this for almost 30 years, and I still don't know, looking 2 months down the road, if I'm going to have any work or not, because I'm constantly, in a sense, I'm always unemployed because I'm always looking for the next gig or the next project, and that's rough. That gets over time. That gets really tiresome. But I love it so much. There's this documentary that Jerry Seinfeld did called Comedian, and it's all about what it's like to try and make it in the comedy business. And he tells this great story about I don't know if it was the Glenn Miller Band or one of these old bands from like the 1940s, and they were traveling from town to town performing their music, and it was the middle of winter, and there's like a blizzard or something, and their bus breaks down on the side of the road, and so they have to walk back into town, and they're walking across this cornfield, all bundled up in their jackets and carrying all their big heavy instruments and everything that's cold and it's blowing, and they walk past this little farmhouse, and they look inside the window, and inside is warm, and there's the family sitting around the table and all laughing and enjoying a meal and just being comfortable and just having a very typical, regular afternoon dinner or evening dinner. And one of the band members looks at the other and says, "How do people live like that?" And the idea is that you are so passionate about your artwork or this calling to do this thing, that you don't want the typical life, that you want to that you're okay with the risks. You're more excited or energized by whatever it takes, as long as I get to draw, or as long as I get to do this thing, I'm willing to pay the price. I think you kind of have to, and the idea of just a regular, traditional, safe job just doesn't seem appealing. I think you kind of have to have that screwed up wiring in your head to make it as an artist. Otherwise, I think you'd give up, because it's just too chaotic and too unpredictable from month to month. It took me 2.5 years. I worked part-time jobs for 2.5 years after college, even before I could freelance full-time. So be patient. Take any job you can get when you're starting out and just learn from it, and try and do stuff that get published, and try and work your way up to better clients. And if you can make that up the ladder, you'll start out you don't know what you're doing, and your clients the people that can afford to pay you, they don't know what they want, and you're going to have lots of frustrations and miscommunications, and you're probably going to have some nightmare projects and do some work that you're not proud of. But then as you work your way up and you get more experience and you get better clients that will communicate better, and they know what they want, and they've got actual budgets and stuff, that hopefully it gets better and easier as time goes on.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
To give people an idea of what it would be like starting out, how you're both not really knowing what you're wanting, your client or you are not really knowing, but as you work your way up to bigger and better clients, things start to get a little bit more clear. What is your favorite tool to use as an artist, and what is it about that tool that really helps you create the amazing art that you do?
Right there, this thing.
Your hands.
Yeah, I don't know. People, I don't. When I was young, I used to think if I just got this right special pencil or this right kind of stylus or something, that then my artwork would get better. But I think it's really just the practice of doing it over and over is what the real important tool is. Because there's just no shortcut. If you just read this book or buy this pencil or whatever, your work will get better. But having said that, I draw digitally. I did Photoshop. I've done Photoshop a lot, and I like it. But Procreate on an iPad is pretty amazing too. And they both have their strengths and weaknesses. I really wish that like I can do about 90% of what I need to do on Procreate, and I think like Procreate is better for inking, for example. I think my inking looks better on Procreate, but there's things it can't do, like working with texts. Their transforming tools are kind of like my ink lines get all jagged when I try to transform them and stuff. So it's there's bugs there. And then in Photoshop is great for a lot of stuff too, but my inking isn't as good, and it's getting to be kind of a clunky, bloated software. I think it's kind of long in the tooth, and so that's kind of my process, is just do it all digitally if I can. I don't even like drawing on paper that much anymore. I like the in this economy with freelancing, you have to try and draw as fast as you can to make decent money. The faster you can crank something out, the more money you make. If you're working for a flat fee, I should say. If you're working per hour, it's the opposite. But if you're working on a flat fee for something, which I usually do, and so I like digital because I can draw a lot faster. I can fix my mistakes real easily, and it's very, very flexible. So and you need to have everything digitized anyway. So I don't know if people are still drawing on paper. You have to. I don't know if anybody out there is, but you need to move to digital if you are.
Where can people find your comics and support you and your works?
Okay, so my regular illustration website is cedricstudio.com, but Narrow Road Comics, it's my Christian web comics that I just kind of do in my free time, is narrowroadcomics.com. Or if you want to follow me on social media, I'm on a lot of social media, but I was going to do @NarrowRoadComics, but turns out that's one too many letters for Twitter. There's a limit to how many characters you can have in your username, so it's Narrow Road Comic on social media, or Narrow Road Comics with an S for the website, and that's where people can find me. And you can follow me if you sign up on my Substack, which there's a link on the page. Then every time I post a new comic, it'll just automatically show up in your inbox, and that's free. You can subscribe if you want to throw a little money my way, but you certainly don't have to. Mainly, I just want people to read them, and if you comment, and if you like them, share them around, and or share your thoughts about anything I say. And so I just want to put stuff out there.
All right. Thanks for coming on. All those links will be in the show notes, and you guys can go check them all out and go support Cedric and the work he's doing. Thank you, Cedric, for coming on. It was a pleasure having you.
Thanks, Paul. It was awesome.
And I hope you all have a good day.
Happy drawing.